My name is Bradley Angel, and I am the Director of Greenaction for Health and Environmental Justice. And Greenaction is a multiracial grassroots organization founded in late 1997 by grassroots leaders from urban, rural, and indigenous communities that I had worked with actually for about 10 and 11 years prior to the forming of Greenaction. And we work on the wide range of pollution, health, and justice issues affecting urban, rural, indigenous communities, primarily in the West and very occasionally, as capacity allows, a little further, but primarily across California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah are our main battlegrounds.
Mm-hmm. And you told me that you've been working in Utah for something like 20 years. And I know you spend a great deal of time there. So can you tell me a little bit more about White Mesa and what's going on?
Yeah, and actually, I started working with communities in Utah around issues of existing and proposed hazardous waste disposal facilities back in the late 1980s, before Greenaction even existed. And that was quite an interesting experience, working in a lot of actually pretty conservative rural, primarily Mormon communities, not known as environmentally friendly, didn't have that reputation. But in fact, everybody is concerned about their health, and everybody is concerned about the air they breathe and the water they drink and the communities they live in. There's a Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, because the Bears Ears, which is a vast area, it's named after a formation that looks like bear's ears. And in all the languages of the tribes that really, in that region, it translates, I understand, I've been educated about, into something resembling the words bear's ears. And it really stands out on the horizon. And from White Mesa, that you have bear's ears, really close by. And directly to the east is also Sleeping Ute Mountain, which is one of the very sacred places of the Ute, as I've again been educated about. So White Mesa sits not just in a beautiful scenic place, but one of profound cultural importance as well. And, real people with kids and lives and families and hope and dreams live there. And every day they deal with the knowledge that radioactive waste from around the world now is being dumped in their backyard, on top of their ancestors, on top of ceremonial kivas and ancient, structures as well. And also, there's threats to groundwater, which the tribal government's environmental department has played a really important role in starting to document and going back and forth with the company who caused this. Part of the reason that Greenaction exists is that, and why community people from so many diverse communities form Greenaction, again, from West Oakland, California, and Richmond, California, to farmer communities in the San Joaquin Valley, like Kettleman City, Madres of East Los Angeles, San Isabel, the Mojave Elders of the Colorado River Indian tribes, and others. The main reason that these groups decided to form an organization that would fight and stand up and, for justice and take action and not sell out is because the government doesn't protect the people. The government doesn't uphold justice. And, we have laws in this country, and they're not good enough. We have environmental laws that exist that are violated, aren't good enough, but even the ones we have are not, in many cases, adhered to. We have religious freedom laws, protection of indigenous people's rights to practice their religion and culture. We have environmental justice policies, including from the Biden administration. A lot of talk about climate justice and environmental justice from the Biden administration. Trump, of course, didn't even pretend to care about that. But, for a decade, for so many years, we hear this rhetoric, but the reality on the ground is different. And this is very true with White Mesa. It is an atrocity. It's an outrage. And, I should mention, we also have, the sacred site protection laws. There's also civil rights laws, which state that our government, if you receive federal funds, you are prohibited under the law, Title VI of the U.S. Civil Rights Act, from taking actions that have what they call a disproportionate impact on protected classes of people. That includes indigenous people. So how is it okay that the US government themselves, and also how is it the US government allows the state of Utah to turn this tiny community into an international waste facility that desecrates sacred sites, interferes with people's and harms people's culture and well-being, and is a threat to public health and the environment. And that's why Greenaction exists. So we work where we're invited and play the role that communities ask us to play. And in White Mesa, it's we're glad we've been there on the front lines with tribal members in the tribe and allies now for more than 2 decades. And we're seeing traction. We're seeing more support from diverse allies, indigenous and non-indigenous groups, getting a lot of media attention finally. But of course, the Biden administration that spews this rhetoric that they support environmental and climate justice and indigenous rights, and they've done some good things like designated Bears Ears as a huge and important national monument. That's great. And they should be commended for that. But right next to Bears Ears, they're allowing radioactive materials, so-called alternative feeds and other radioactive material to be dumped at the uranium mill. We hear a lot about, and the environmental justice movement talks about, and Native nations, that there should be, and whether it's a community or a tribe, should have the right to prior informed consent before their homeland and areas and communities are dumped on and poisoned by pollution and industrial pollution and threats. To my knowledge, nobody went and asked the Ute Mountain Ute tribe if you want a giant uranium mill, or if you want this uranium mill to turn into a giant international waste facility before it happened, right? The tribe certainly did not give permission to desecrate the burial sites of their ancestors, to destroy ceremonial kivas, to import radioactive waste on trucks that go right through the White Mesa Ute community, and this small community. And so that's a really important concept. But in reality, it doesn't happen. And White Mesa is not the only example that it doesn't happen. Decades ago, again, at the start of Greenaction and work that I was engaged in just for a few years prior to late '97 when Greenaction formed, as I mentioned earlier, working with the Fort Mojave, Quechan, Cocopah, Chemehuevi and Colorado River Indian tribes to fight the proposed Ward Valley nuclear waste dump, again, off reservation, but clearly sacred and traditional land. And as I mentioned earlier, when the federal police were being sent in with the nuclear company, and the police were going to try to clear the area of indigenous and environmental justice protesters who had been camped out at the site, and the tribes and Greenaction, many others, called for peaceful defense of the site. And it turned, as I mentioned, into a 113-day standoff and occupation against the police, and until the White House had to cave in. But during that struggle, the White House sent the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and top White House officials to meet with the tribal government, and to demand that, and the US government actually threatened the tribes. I was the non-tribal member invited by the tribes to kind of observe. I was in the back of the room with the elders as all the tribal presidents, chair people, and council members were meeting with the White House guys. And the White House threatened the tribes, and they said, and I'm pretty much quoting verbatim, the US government does not fund tribes engaged in criminal activity against the US government. You're occupying federal land, supposedly illegally. Take down the barricades or you will lose all of your federal funding. And for Native nations, that's huge. And there was dead silence in the room. And I'm in the back of the room thinking, damn the US government, right? This is yet another crime that's going to go down in the history books. And, literally, threatening, education, health programs, housing programs, jobs. And the tribal leaders asked the feds to leave the room, the White House guys to leave the room. And I knew this was going to be the decision, kind of would that nuclear dump happen? And the vice chairman of the Fort Mojave Indian tribe, a really amazing man and a hero and well respected by all the river tribes, Llewellyn Barrickman, he stands up with his cane and says, when I was young, they took me from my family and they cut my Mojave hair and they beat me because I just spoke Mojave, and they tried to strip me of my culture and they intimidated us and humiliated us. And then he raised his cane and said, we cannot be humiliated again. The barricades remain. It was one of the most beautiful things of all time in my life as an activist and just human being. And everybody cheered and they said, bring the feds back in the room. And it was this beautiful moment where the feds come in really cocky and arrogant, thinking they're going to get the surrender. And the tribal leaders tell them the barricades will remain until the nuclear dump project is canceled. And the federal government, and before they stormed out of the room, Preston Arrowweed, a traditional leader from the Kutzon Nation, turned to the feds and said, which one of you is going to shoot me? Because that's what it's going to take to get me off this, out of the occupation and stop defending our land. And these guys just ran out the door. And it was great. It led to the great victory. And I take a couple of minutes to talk about this because that battle and victory has inspired the Kutzon and Preston Arrowweed to stand up against cyanide leach gold mining at Indian Pass, which was defeated a couple of years ago and might come back, but score one for our side. Greenaction was proud to stand with Preston and the tribal members and tribal government. They're fighting another proposed cyanide leach gold mine called Oro Cruz. It's inspired the people from White Mesa. And this and all these people have now been supporting each other. And that's a role that Greenaction has helped play, is networking and sharing these stories. You can actually win. Do not give up. And that's really important for the people from White Mesa. So every year, the Fort Mojave Indian Tribe in February sponsors a victory celebration. We're now in, the next one this February will be, in February 2024, will be the 26th anniversary. And I'm glad to say the 25th was the biggest gathering since the occupation. It's hundreds and hundreds of people. And people from White Mesa came and Preston was there. And it's just very inspiring. So when the people from White Mesa return north to their homeland in southern Utah, they return more inspired with more allies and friends. And now we're working with the White Mesa Concerned Community and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and many other allies, but led by the grassroots tribal group and tribal member group in the tribe, organizing now and reaching out, and everybody's invited to come to White Mesa Saturday, October 14th for what's become an annual spiritual walk and protest. It's like a 5-mile walk. It kicks off with a rally at the community center and a 5-mile walk procession to the uranium mills front gate. And Bears Ears is there, right there. And again, people also directly to the east is Sleeping Ute Mountain. And so it's, this is what is so important, is bringing people together and just providing backup and support and solidarity and encouraging people not to give up, because you can actually win. We were talking earlier about the early days of my work in the late 80s. And as I mentioned, that those issues were that at the time, and to Greenpeace's credit at the time, and it was a lot of my work also, there was an explosion in proposals, industry proposals, to build incinerators, to burn toxic waste and garbage waste, solid waste, garbage, some medical waste proposals. And the West Desert of Utah was targeted. That was some of the work I mentioned earlier. All across California, dozens and dozens of proposals, again, from the San Francisco Bay Area, countless proposals in the central San Joaquin Valley and the Imperial Valley, and East LA and South Central Los Angeles. And a lot of this was driven by an industry and government strategy of targeting what they saw as the most gullible, vulnerable, and easy to build, get through public opposition. And this was easily the reality. You never see these things proposed in rich white communities. And my work over the, I've dealt with hundreds of these projects, and there's no doubt where industry and government targets. But this was actually, the government actually had the nerve to put this in paper. So back in 1984, I believe, the state of California's Integrated Waste Management Board commissioned a consulting firm called Sorrell and Associates, and they did an infamous study. And I'm just paraphrasing the name of the study, but something like the political difficulties of siting waste to energy facilities. But basically, it was a report, and it did not say go dump on, poor people of color. Exactly, but it pretty much said that. And it listed the characteristics of those communities they saw as most likely to resist, and we all know what those might be, and those least likely to resist, and those were rural, low income, in need of jobs, lower education, and religious. And what we saw, and so, you saw it primarily low income people of color communities. You also saw low income and working class and highly religious and rural Mormon communities in Utah. And again, as I mentioned, hundreds of people from those communities rose up as well, although the state of Utah ran a couple of those through. But when industry ran into roadblocks and fierce opposition they never dreamed would happen from the little farm worker town of Kettleman City, or from the Madres of East Los Angeles, or Black community groups in South Central, they were, I'm sure it would have been great to hear those discussions, but it was probably, damn, we've tried everything. Who's even more vulnerable in their minds?
Mm-hmm.
And where's it easier to get permits? And so in around 1988, early 89, I started getting calls from Indigenous people far across the US, and saying, can you tell me what an incinerator is? It doesn't sound good, but one's proposed for our reservation. And so I got a call, for example, from Navajo people, Dene people in Dilcon, Arizona, on the Navajo Nation, expressing, what's an incinerator? We kind of think it's not good. Can you help us? And there's a company called Waste Tech that says they really like Navajo people and they have a special deal just for us. And I was invited to come to Dilcon. And actually, that victory led to really the formation of the Indigenous Environmental Network. But lo and behold, I then got a call in the same time period from Chickaloon Village in Alaska. Hi, we were told to call you. You might know something about this. We need help fighting an incinerator. There's this company called Waste Tech that says they have a special deal just for us. And then I got a call from people, Vivian Jake and her colleague on the Kaibab Paiute Reservation. Special deal just for that impoverished tribe, a company called Waste Tech. Same from Oklahoma. And that's why industry, that was in the 80s. And even the beautiful thing is, like 99% of those were defeated by the people, and led by grassroots opposition in the tribes, and sometimes by the tribal government when they realized what was happening. But that targeting and dumping industry's waste and toxics and radioactive waste and stuff that would never be tolerated where the heads of government live, where the heads of these companies live, continues to be dumped in places like the White Mesa, on White Mesa, next to the White Mesa Ute community.
Well, we happen to be talking about quite a few of them these days. Thacker Pass.
That's right.
Kihimaha in Paiute language. And we're also talking about the so-called Lithium Valley, which is in Imperial Valley when you're describing low-income communities and people of color and all their vulnerabilities. And we know their air quality problems because of the receding of the waters of the Salton Sea and the blowing of airborne materials and dust containing herbicides and pesticides, and probably a lot of other chemicals that I'm not even aware of. So they all have this in common, this targeting and pressure. Is there anything you can say about Lithium Valley? Because that's so obtuse in a way. You know, the technology is not really being discussed because they say it's intellectual property, and it involves removing lithium from geothermal wells in a second stage process. And no one seems to know how much lithium there is, how long it would be productive for, what the exact impacts are to water and air. Still, I presume there are some, and CO2 releasing and so forth from the construction and all of that. So there seem to be a lot of hidden costs even when, you know, we have a special deal just for you.
Exactly. And, you know, it's also, you know, the lithium boom is also being framed, and it's a very challenging issue, I admit, because it's being framed as a green part of the green revolution and getting away from fossil fuels. And to an extent, that's true. But, you know, and the Thacker Pass project is very different, even technology wise, than the Salton Sea and Lithium Valley. You know, Thacker Pass is just traditional, you know, destroy, you know, everything, right? And
Dig up the
insult to
valley.
injury, it's on a, you know, very an area very sacred to the indigenous people, a massacre site. And again, just not, you know, those issues are just, even though there's laws, some of which I mentioned earlier, the guy, oh, it's no big deal, right? Well, you know, let's see one of these things proposed in a, you know, mainstream religion's cemetery, right? It's just not going to happen. In the Imperial Valley, it's really a gigantic public relations bonanza, right? You have these companies joined by local elected officials and the state, all, you know, proclaiming this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It does appear to be different technology, but the issues that you've mentioned in terms of air pollution, impact on water, hazardous waste disposal is another one, are all issues that need to be looked at more. I mean, the good news is they wouldn't be doing the surface, you know, destroy the whole surface of the environment there. But this is, the Imperial Valley is already highly impacted. It's primarily Latino, but a lot of indigenous people, native nations there. And, you know, we hear from some of our indigenous colleagues of concerns about, you know, the sacredness of the area, concerns about also environmental impacts, such as earthquakes could potentially impact and cause damage from these operations. And very much, you know, when, you know, final decisions are made, you know, I am not confident based on the track record of our government that they're actually going to properly consider that, you know, what are the impacts, real expected, not make believe, real expected impacts from these operations, and what does that mean? What effect will it have on the, you know, the large population of residents who already suffer high rates of asthma and cancer? You know, there people work in the pesticide-laden fields. There's terrible air quality, just all types of pollution issues there, and other socioeconomic impacts that make people more vulnerable. And the government's answer right now is, oh, there's dollar signs, right? So they're trying to buy, like we see so often, industry tries to placate. Sometimes they don't even care. They don't even bother with that. But they try to placate in many instances, including we're seeing in the Imperial Valley, opposition or potential opposition with, oh, well, we're going to donate so much, there'll be jobs and community benefits and things like that. And, you know, community benefits are great if it's safe. But if it's not safe, you know, you can't put a price tag on people's health and lives. And so,
yeah, well, you know, the community safety is a really interesting question. We were discussing this in one of my other projects, that, you know, how to build a successful village of the future in Alaska, you know, where Many villages are suffering from melting permafrost and may even have to move, etc. And we were coming up with these solutions of how to network people, like you're saying, and the importance of that. And my colleague said, how can we translate this to Los Angeles? And it wasn't exactly the follow-up question that I anticipated, but really it gets to the heart of what you're saying. And here in California, we live in a larger community that includes, let's just say for the sake of conversation, everybody. And in the Brawley geothermal field, apparently there was research done correlating the time and location of drilling activities with earthquake swarms in the area. And I know there's a similar study going on involving Dr. Michael McKibben and others related to that location of the geothermal activity at the south end of Salton Sea and its proximity to the fault. And apparently it's much closer. But I have not yet seen research that would indicate that an earthquake swarm triggered at Brawley would have any less impact on the potential fault slippage that has been suggested could well produce an 8.0 earthquake in the state of California.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that, but these are all issues that really need to be considered. But if you look at the government websites and industry websites and the, Salton Sea, Imperial Valley, the Lithium Commission, it's all rah, rah, rah. And part of what our colleagues in the Imperial Valley, including Comité Civico del Valle, who we work with on a wide range of issues, pollution and health and justice issues, everybody's trying to get a handle on, what are the potential impacts? What are how do we understand, is this technology that's being proposed in the Salton Sea, is it really safe? Yes, it appears to be different than proposed, say the Thacker Pass project, but that doesn't mean it's okay. And but there's a lithium rush, and it's like the gold rush, and they're seeing dollar signs. And if Greenaction's position is, if something can be done safely and is really needed, but done safely without harm to people, health, environment, sacred sites, that's a good thing. We're not convinced that's the case with the Salton Sea projects, and only if things are safe and acceptable to the community, then they can talk about community benefits and negotiate that with the community. So, too often when there's dirty industrial projects, I'll give you an example. In California, there's 2 commercial hazardous waste landfills. There used to be 3, including in Westmoreland, right by Brawley. And that dump, thank goodness, closed just a couple of years ago. But all 3 are in Spanish-speaking farmer communities, not a coincidence. All 3 were approved decades ago with racially discriminatory permit processes. The Kettleman and Buttonwillow facilities that are operating today are operating on expired permits. And again, permits issued years and years and years ago with straight up racism, English only processes, with police intimidation of residents. And but in Kettleman City, I'll give the example, Kettleman City itself is an unincorporated town. And so the county, Kings County, benefits enormously from the tax base from the biggest hazardous waste landfill in the West, run by Waste Management, Chemical Waste Management, the Kettleman Hills Hazardous Waste Facility. And the people of Kettleman City barely, for many years, they had no sidewalks. They had no clean drinking water. They had no street lights, no infrastructure. And it's still pretty much like that. The only reason Kettleman City has clean drinking water now is thanks to a civil rights complaint and settlement that Greenaction and the community group reached with the state in 2016. But so this is another example where, the company will donate for school uniforms, or they give out little trinkets and Frisbees with, could you imagine giving a chem waste management, from a toxic waste company to kids in their schools? I mean, this is what happens. So they dangle the dollars, right? And our government lets this happen, right? So rather than our government taking care of our lowest income communities, they use these as dumping grounds, government approved dumping grounds. And this is what we call environmental racism. This is what is unjust. And as I mentioned at the start of our discussion today, you know, the laws we have in this country aren't strong enough, but they're not even enforced, right? And, you know, Greenaction, one of our main missions, or I should say strategies, has been to shove the existence of state and federal civil rights laws down the throat of government. And years ago, government agencies, several, told me at one point, oh, we don't have to consider civil rights in our permit decisions around a toxic dump or in, you know, some other nasty polluting industry. I said, oh, really? I don't recall seeing an exemption for you in the law. And so we've been effectively using it, including to bring clean drinking water to Kettleman City. But these are all issues that affect White Mesa. White Mesa is a civil rights issue, an indigenous rights issue, a health issue, a justice issue. And how is it that the Biden administration, like every Democratic administration, and I'm not even talking about the Trumps, but, you know, because we knew which side they're on, they didn't even pretend to care. But Biden administration, Obama, Clinton, they all pretended to care about this stuff. You know, Clinton had the executive order on environmental justice, but they don't follow these things. It's meaningless. Maybe they'll throw some grants out to some, you know, nonprofits. And that buys off some groups, and that buys their silence. It doesn't buy Greenaction off, that's for sure. And we're like, to hell with your grants to environmental justice communities and organizations. Make the right decisions so we don't have to exist. Do your job. But that doesn't happen in our society, where, in our capitalist society, where industry profit rules. And so the battle continues. And we will continue working on the front lines with communities, with Native nations, with our allies, to protect health and promote justice and achieve it. But it's, so a lot of things have changed in the 35 or 6 years I've been doing this work. But what hasn't changed is the anything goes for corporate profit attitude of both industry and government. And so the struggle for justice goes on.